Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. What if the Uzumaki elders to Naruto away from Konoha? Harem Part 13. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. Danzo, the elder Sarutobi stared emotionlessly into his old teammate's eyes as he approached him. I see you're still operating in the shadows. Please, he scoffed at his old friend with a smirk on his face. Like you haven't known the entire time. You'd be suspired at how much I know these days. He walked up to the chair that was in front of his desk and sat down. What did you find out? About what? Sarutobi slammed his hands down into the desk in front of him. He looked up at the man in front of him with the meanest glare he could muster. Don't play games with me, Danzo. The only game I'm playing is one you were too weak to finish all those years ago. The Root Commander sneered. Remember, I'm the one who has the guts to make these moves. Or did that slip your mind when you went to pity those fools? And I want you to remember that it's not you they'll blame but me when they find all of this out. The Elder Cage yelled into the empty cave where they sat. When who figures it out? Danzo asked with a raised eyebrow. The last ones who came close to figuring out are now dead. The only one who has a chance of figuring all of this out is busy dealing with 3 brats, 2 of which aren't even here's. And a loveless marriage that. I'd be careful about what you say about those 2 children, Danzo. Hiruzen interrupted before continuing. All 3 of them have been commissioned for the Anbu Black Ops. Hiruzen warned as he eyed his old teammate. Ah yes. Danzo stood up and walked up to the glass window that was behind his desk. Itachi Uchiha, Shisui Uchiha, and Naruto Uzumaki. Or should I call him Namikaze now that he's in Chunin? How did you find out about that? Hiruzen growled angrily through gritted teeth. Oh please, Danzo waved off the man with a small chuckle. I can see your political moves from a mile away. It was obvious that you wanted them to be Anbu. I'm shocked Hitaki hasn't figured it out yet. Actually he has, and how did you even know about that? All nominations and applications are a rank secrets. Are you really suggesting that there's information in this village that I don't know about? Danzo chuckled to himself quietly, which made the elderly Cage even more frustrated. But to answer your question, you have quite a few leaks in your administration. And where are they? Suddenly the cavern was filled with a boisterous laughter. Hiruzen looked at Danzo, who was still looking at the window, but now was holding his stomach due to his laughter. I didn't realize that I had become a walking comedian. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes, and glared daggers into his friend's back. Oh Hiruzen, Danzo said while wiping a tear from the corner of eye. You think I'm just gonna tell you where the leaks are? He turns back around and smirked at the man. That's not how this game works and you know it. I'm very well aware of how this game we play works. Hiruzen grumbled with eyes full of hate. If you're so well aware, then why are you asking me such stupid questions? Danzo chucked as he walked back to his desk. Honesty, I'm starting to see why you were replaced all those years ago. The desk that was in front of them was no more as soon as those words left Danzo's mouth. Splinters of wood rained down from the sky like little wooden raindrops. Danzo smirked at the amount of chakra that was wafting off the elderly Cage like rays of sunlight. Did I strike a nerve? Danzo asked with mock concern in his voice. He grinned at the old man in front of him who was still seething with rage. Don't mention that. Sarutobi bellowed into the cavern, cause him to leak out more chakra. Ma. Danzo waved him off and started pick up papers that were now on the stone-cold floor. So what was it you wanted anyway? What you found out when you sent 4 of your root after Naruto? Hiruzen yelled at the man who raised an eyebrow in response. I never sent anyone after Naruto and that Hyuga. You're not the only one who can get information in this village, Danzo. I want what you know and I want it now. Well, that's too bad because he killed them all. Silence for a long time after that was said. Sarutobi knew that Naruto was strong. He knew that Naruto was strong. He knew that Naruto could take care of himself, but to beat 4 of Danzo's men, That was something that he was not expecting. How strong were the ones you sent this time? He asked after a few beats of silence. Mid to high Chunin. I told you to send strong opponents if you were going to go down this path. Hiruzen cried in frustration. You told me to send opponents that wouldn't kill him. Hiruzen facepalmed and started rubbing the bridge of his nose. So you've got nothing on his abilities? Nope, although, I'm sure you haven't just asked him about it. You think it's that easy? Hiruzen asked the man with a raised eyebrow and a chuckle. Maybe I'm not the only one who's losing their edge. Ah, that's right, he's under the protection of one Makoto Uchiha. Danzo growled to himself, which made Sarutobi chuckle. What's wrong? Sarutobi chided with a smirk. Something not to your liking. I'm shocked you're not worried about her more. She's one of the only people in this whole village who could figure this whole thing out. It's not like she can do anything about it. Fugaku has made her credibility almost zero. Everyone thinks she's just a fangirl of the Yondaime, and everyone's terrified of her. He explained while stacking more papers. Hell, I'm shocked she's not pregnant again so that he can keep a closer eye on her. Danzo commented while organizing the remains of his desk. Sarutobi got up from his chair and turned towards the exit. Yes, because we all know how Fugaku loves his women submissive and breedable. He sarcastically commented while walking away. Danzo looked up from the splinters that were his desk and raised an eyebrow at the retreating form of his old friend. Leaving so soon? Yes, Hiruzen answered without turning around to face the man. Unlike you, my work never ends. Danzo chuckled at his old friend's answer as he watched him walk away. Deep down, he always enjoyed these meetings with the cage. He would never admit it, but having someone to play political games with was pleasing to him. In fact, Sarutobi finally stopped and turned around to give one last parting thought. I have a feeling both of our jobs are about to get very interesting. With that, Sarutobi vanished from the deep dark cave that was the root headquarters. Danzo knew that he was right. He knew that now that Naruto and Hinata were back in the village, things would never be the same. He just didn't know how right he was. When Hinata opened her eyes, she immediately noticed that she was in a really soft bed. She turned over to her side and saw a beautiful vase of lilies sitting in water. Ever since she was a child, she had loved playing with flowers. She even persuaded her mother to let her have a rose garden where she would be able to plant and breed different flowers. She looked over and saw the reason she was in the hospital in the first place. In a bed adjacent to her was her savior, her friend, her hero, Naruto Uzumaki. While she might have been unconscious during most of the journey back, she knew that she would have died had it not been for him. Oh Naruto, why is it always you saving me? She wondered aloud to herself in the hospital room. This wasn't the first time that Naruto had saved her. No, it had happened many times when they were on missions to kill bandits before the exams. She could remember these times as clear as day, but yet she couldn't remember a single time where she had saved him. She couldn't remember a single time where she had stopped a kunai, warned him of danger, or anything. The only thing remotely close was telling him about that strange woman she had seen when they were walking to the exams in the first place. Kami, that seems so long ago at this point. She thought to herself as she stared outside of the window. She had been looking out of the window for a while, watching as the wind blew the leaves gently through the sky. She envied the leaves, able to freely go wherever they wanted without a care in the world. It's different now, right? I mean, what was the point of us going to those exams? Was it to die? Surely we weren't meant to pass anything. Was it a setup? She didn't know. Hell, she didn't know if Naruto knew. All she knew was that she had been stuck in the woods of Kurigakure for what felt like an eternity. Good morning, Hinata. She looked up and was quite shocked to see so many people entering the room. She raised an eyebrow when she realized that she didn't sense them before they entered the room. She saw that her parents were there along with Kakashi, Yugao, Makoto, and the Hokage. She smiled at her parents who smiled back at her. Good morning, Hokage-sama. She replied in a neutral tone which didn't go unnoticed by the other occupants of the room. Her peel-like eyes swept the entire room and took in the multiple people that were in it. How are you feeling? Her mother asked while walking over to her still bed-bound daughter. Hitomi observed her daughter and frowned. She's on guard, she thought with a frown. I'm feeling much better, Ka-chan, thank you for asking. The little girl replied while still keeping an unreadable face. For the people in the room, then little girl in front of them was totally unrecognizable from the little girl that they had known just 90 days prior. I'm glad you are feeling much better, Hinata. We were quite worried about you and poor Naruto-kun while you were at the exams, Sarutobi said with a kind, grandfatherly smile on his face. Instead of responding, she had chosen to keep silent and nod her head. This didn't cause too much alarm in the room since she had always been a quiet child, however, those who really knew her knew that something was going on. There was a strange silence being kept in the room. The kind of silence that meant an uncomfortable conversation was on the horizon. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. To Hinata, the room felt like it was suffocating due to how much negative energy was in the room. And she wasn't the only one to feel it either. She glanced over at her companion, Naruto, and noticed that his heart rate monitor was showing a slightly higher heart rate than normal. Something is going on here, and I need to figure out what it is. They are going to cause his blood pressure to change if they aren't careful. Was there something you needed, Hokage-sama? She asked the old man, who internally frowned. He had wanted to spend a little more time out of his office, but alas, duty called. Actually, he reached into the pockets of his robes and dug out 2 scrolls. There are a few things we need to discuss. He walked over and placed the scrolls onto the girl's lap. I want you to open those 2 scrolls. This conversation can't continue until you do. He smiled and watched as Hinata grabbed the scrolls. She examined them and shrugged her shoulders, figuring that if the Hokage was giving them to her, then they must be safe. She weighed the scrolls in her hands, feeling the high-quality materials that they were made out of. She then channeled chakra into them and watched as they unraveled, revealing a Chunin jacket and a letter addressed to her. She raised an eyebrow and looked back at the man, confusion written all over her face. Why am I getting promoted? She asked the man, much to the shock of everyone in the room. I barely did anything while we were there. Actually, let's get into that. The elderly man crossed his arms and looked at Hinata, authority wafting off of him even before he spoke. Please tell me what happened during the exams, and please, don't leave anything out. He gave the poor girl a look that dared her to try lying to him. Wait, wouldn't you want Naru-kun to also be awake so that he can give his import? Kakashi asked his boss, who shook his head. No, Kakashi, that would take too long. The doctor says that he won't be concours for another 2 weeks. Hinata is ready and willing to give us answers now, right, Hinata? His eyes lowered down on the little who nodded her head. Good, now, why don't you start when you fought the root agent and didn't ask for backup? Hinata gulped at the accusation, but stayed strong. After everything she had gone through in the past few months, this was hardly the worst thing to ever happen to her. Well, sir, Naruto sensed a bad vibe coming from the man who was supposed to be acting as our sensei. He had me scan his person with my eyes and we discovered a seal at the base of his tongue. That was when Naruto and I engaged him in open combat. He was actually fairly strong, but Naruto didn't want to cause an all-out fight in the middle of the pathway to the village gate, so we decided to let our summons do the bulk of the fighting. She explained to the group, who all nodded their heads, accepting the words that were coming out of her mouth. Okay, but why didn't you request backup after you found out that there was a possible plot in Kurigakure? Sarutobi inquired while pacing the space just in front of the Hyuga's bed. Well, I tried to get Naruto to agree to send for Ka-chan and Makoto-sensei, but he said that we could handle it ourselves. She then went on to explain how they came to the agreement to use their summons to relay a message to the cage that something had happened. You know, what Naruto did was actually pretty smart. Shikaku commented after Hinata was finished speaking. He deliberately left out crucial information that Hokage-sama would have used to determine whether or not it was worth the risk of sending out backup. He must have thought that both of them could complete the mission without outside help. Or he was an idiot who was overconfident in his abilities and thought that they didn't need any help. Kakashi added with a frown visible through his mask. I tried to get him to send a message requesting for backup, but he didn't agree. Once he explained his reason, I agreed with him. He explained that the two obvious choices would have been to send Makoto and Ka-chan. Both of them would have been coddling us the entire time. So, we just decided to ride it out. Hinata explained to the group, who all understood. We wanted to prove ourselves and make a statement that we could do this. While I commend both of you for wanting to prove yourselves, Hiruzen looked up and glared at the girl who, surprisingly, didn't flinch nor waver under his gaze. What both of you did was not only reckless, but it was downright stupid. I mean, going into a foreign country with no information about it along with no backup has bad idea written all over it. I would expect a decision like this to come from someone like Naruto, but you, Hinata. This is unexpected and out of character. I expect that this will not happen again and that you will inform the administration if you are in legitimate need of backup. Hinata had had enough of hearing what the Hokage had to say. She didn't want to hear that what she and Naruto did was wrong. They didn't have very many options to begin with, and didn't have a lot of time to choose an option. He wasn't there, she angrily thought while gazing at the man in front of her. Eyes narrowed as she channeled her first batches of ki ever. If it wasn't already clear to everyone in that room, Hinata had changed. She wasn't the same little girl she was when she left the village all those months ago. She had the look of someone who had seen her fair share of things. She wasn't about to sit back and listen to someone talk down to her. Last time I checked, decisions like this fall on the captain of the squad. And when the captain is indisposed, it's a vote among the members of the squad. Hinata fired back at the Hokage, who coiled back in shock. He had expected multiple things, but not a nasty Hinata. That's what we did. We voted and both of us agreed to not tell you about it. I don't appreciate you talking down to me like I don't know the results of that decision. Last time I checked, you're not the one in the hospital bed, I am. And don't talk bad about Naruto-kun when he isn't here to defend himself. She turned away from the man and looked back at the window. She let out a deep breath. She watched as more leaves guided through the wind. This time, two smaller leaves fall away from the much larger group, twisting and turning in the wind as they defended to their final resting place on the ground. Hokage-sama, Shikaku looked at the man who turned his head over his shoulder. I think you should talk about what's next for Naruto and Hinata. He knew that they weren't going to get any more information out of Hinata. Something had happened to her, something bad, and they weren't going to find out what it was, and they would just have to live with that. Hiruzen frowned but nodded his head. He wasn't afraid to admit that he wanted to know what truly happened while Naruto and Hinata were away. While he did have alternative methods to get information out of people, he didn't want to do that here. He glanced around at everyone and let out a sigh. Makoto-chan, would you be so kind as to get Hinata and I some tea? He looked at the Uchiha, who nodded her head and promptly left the room. Thank you. He turned back to face Hinata, who still was refusing to face him. Hinata, I'd like you to open the second scroll. Hinata looked at the second scroll that was sitting on her bedside table with intrigue. It was a deep red and much smaller than the scroll that contained her Chunin jacket. She shrugged her shoulders and unsealed the contents. A piece of paper fell out of the scroll and landed on the sheets. She picked up the paper and quickly scanned it. So he was right, she mumbled to herself quietly. She glanced up at the Hokage and noticed his shocked expression. What? Did you not think Naruto and I wouldn't think about our lives outside after we participated in the exams? She asked the man with a raised eyebrow. When did he figure it out? Sarutobi asked while leaning closer towards his newest mystery. You don't give Naruto-kun enough credit. She smirked at the man and looked over at her still sleeping best friend. He told me that we would be either in the academy or put into the Anbu. I see. He looked at Naruto and chuckled. Perhaps I have underestimated him greatly. He thought to himself before returning to look at the child. Well, Naruto-kun was correct. You both have been scouted and recruited by the Anbu commander herself. She was very adamant that both you and Naruto join. Okay, I'll do it. The temperature in the room dropped to an icy level after Hinata's declaration. Yugawa and Kakashi were happy about it due to the fact that she was going to be on their squad if she made it through basic. Makoto, who had just passed out the cups of tea, was also quite pleased with Hinata's dedication. Hitomi was not as happy about Hinata's decision as the others. She had wished to talk to her daughter for a little while before she chose whether or not she was going to condemn a large portion of her childhood to the shadows. She looked at Hinata, who looked at her with the same determination that she herself had when she was trying to get into the Anbu when she was younger. When she looked into her daughter's eyes, she didn't see the same semi-innocent little girl she was when she left in late July. No, she saw the looks of a woman that has seen the hardships of the world they live in. As a mother she was horrified, but as a shinobi, she didn't know what to feel. She knew that this was a necessary evil, but part of her wanted to take her place. She wanted to be the one in the trenches, fighting, killing for her village. Not her 4-year-old daughter. Well, are you sure? She finally asked her little girl, who nodded at her. Yes, Ka-chan, I need to do this, she said desperately. Hiruzen looked at the cup of tea that Makoto had handed him. He had been caged for a very long time, but never had he ever thought that he would be interviewing a 4-year-old for his most elite ninjas. He looked up at the young girl, who looked at him with a fierce gaze. He sighed and finally took a sip of his tea. Hinata. He shifted his old, tired eyes over to the window. Why are you doing this? And I want a clear answer. He moved his eyes back to the girl who, by this point, had gone ridged. Deep down you know you weren't built for fighting, Hinata. Sarutobi sipped his tea while keeping eye contact with the child in front of him. Hinata, you are such a kind and gentle soul. Why would you want this life? Why would you want to pursue a life of killing, serving one's village? Why would you subject yourself to this? You can always do this when you were about to say that I could do this when I'm older. Weren't you, Hokage-sama? She asked the old man sitting in front of her. He was about to respond but was silenced when Hinata continued to speak. Well, are you going to offer that same option to Naruto? She once again asked the Hokage, who looked away from her in shame. Are you going to give him the option to be a kind and gentle soul? Or that he could do all this when he's older? Tell me now, Hokage-sama. She stopped, commanding him to look at her with the authority in her voice. She knew she had his, her parents, Makoto's, even Kakashi and Yugao's attention. She knew that right now, she had the world's attention. I know what happened. I know that he lived almost a year in isolation. I know that he's the Jinchuriki. I know that this village is a lion's den. Hell, you know it too. You know, deep down, he can't have a normal childhood. He never has and he never will. You can't give him the option of being a normal child, because you know, deep down, he never was nor will be normal. So how dare you offer me something you know you can't give him? Her words reverberated off of the small hospital room walls as they sunk into the skulls of those that heard it. Hiyashi and Hitomi looked at each other and nodded their heads. They both knew that there was no dissuading their daughter off of this path. They both looped their arms around each other's waists and listened. They listened to what Hinata had to say, as did everyone else. You want to know the reason I'm going to do this? She asked the old man, and everyone else in the room who nodded his head. She sighed while rubbing her eyes with her hands. I'm doing this so he won't be alone, she finally answered, much to everyone's surprise. I sense something dark in him. When he looked at me with those Sharingan eyes, they were cold. They were Evil. If he has to do this, then I'll do it with him. I'm not doing this for my village. I'm not doing this for the Hyuga name. I'm doing this to keep Naruto from destroying himself. You don't understand what I saw in those eyes of his. It was like they were growing darker and darker. I can't leave him alone to that darkness. Not after everything he did to save me. She glanced over at her best friend who was still sleeping peacefully in his bed, blissfully unaware of everything being said in the room. Not after the lives he's ended to save mine, the miles he ran, the sleepless nights he endured. And you want me to continue to be a kind and gentle soul? She spat at the Hokage who bowed his head in shame. She took a breath and looked out the window, watching as the wind blew the leaves gently through the air, carrying them to their new destination, wherever it may be. She observed how some leaves twisted and turned in the gentle breeze, and smiled softly. I'm going to be there for him, she whispered gently while looking at the poor comatose boy, tears welling in her eyes as she gripped the white sheets under her. I'm going to be his shield. I'm going to stand by his side. In every fight, in every war, in everything. I will not leave his side. She shouted, determination swelling up in her small chest. Deep down, I know I can't do everything, but I can, and will, attempt to do everything I can to be the support that he needs. The support of a medic, strategist, and, as a friend. She moved her hands to wipe the stray tear that was about to fall from her eye. She took a deep breath and looked Sarutobi dead in the eyes, a fire billowing behind her cream-colored pearls. That's why I'm doing this, Hokage-sama. She smiled. He's why I'm going to train. Day and night if I have to. Also I can stand at his side. Now, forever, and always. Naruto didn't remember when he could start to feel other people. It sort of just happened for him. He had just been floating in a dark void, endlessly drifting in nothingness. Slowly but surely he was able to feel and hear. It wasn't a quick process by any means, but what initially were raw noises to him started to become voices. What used to be raw chakra around now could be distinguished between different living things. Now, Naruto was back to what he thought he could function. He could sense people around him, he could pinpoint where all the nurses and doctors were in the hospital. He could feel the swirling of people's chakra as they moved closer to them. He could identify their emotions as they passed his room, and smell what they ate for breakfast that day. This, of course, meant that he could feel when 3 people walked into his room in the dead of night. He kept his eyes closed, but was now wide awake, ready to strike. Is he awake yet? One of them, a man, asked while they moved around the room. I don't think so, another, this one a woman, said while moving to look at what Naruto thought was probably his chart. Says here that he shouldn't be up and moving till after New Year's. Good, the third and final person said as they walked behind the women. Let's keep it that way. We have orders to do this as quietly as possible. Of course, the woman said while reaching into what Naruto thought was some kind of bag. He could feel her reaching and pulled out a kunai. Well, that's not good, Naruto thought as he moved his arm to stop the woman's arm. He sat up and opened his eyelids to reveal his bright blue slitted eyes. Well, he smirked as he looked at the 3 killers in his room. This is one way to wake up from a coma. He didn't let the ninjas recover from their shock and jumped out of the bed, ripped the IV out of his arm, and started sprinting out of the room. After him, the boss shouted. Naruto didn't need to look behind him to feel the kunai knives that were flying towards him. He ducked and weaved out of their way as he continued to run down the hallway, hospital gown blowing in the wind he was creating. Shit, he cursed as he turned around to see the 3 ninjas blocking his only exit. You have nowhere to go. Naruto turned to look at his would-be assailants and took in their appearances. We really need to upgrade this village's security, he thought as he noticed the kiri headbands the 3 ninjas wore. Why are Kurigakure ninjas after me? He shouted as he tried to get as much information out of them as he could while he thought of a good escape. He didn't want to use any chakra because he didn't know if he could or not. Well, only one way to find out. He thought as started going through potential options to get him out of this situation. That's none of your concern, child, the woman said. She was wearing a black top, skin-tight bottoms, and ninja heels. She had brown eyes and wore her brown hair in a ponytail and had a deep scar running across her right cheek. Plus it's not like you're going to live much longer anyway, said the man who Naruto recognized as the first person to enter the room. He wore the same all-black outfit, but had a much larger build than the woman's more lithe frame. He had jet black hair which fell about his shoulders, and black eyes. Oh, Naruto asked as he formed the ram hand sign with his left hand. This is going to hurt like hell, he thought before smirking. Who said I was dying? Fire style. Fireball jutsu. He turned around and blew a fireball into the wall, causing it to crumble, allowing for the cold Konoha winter air to rush into the hallway. He shivered slightly and jumped out of the hole he created and launched himself as far away as possible. Once he landed on one of the lower roofs of the hospital, he sprinted towards the edge of it and hopped to another roof which was close by. I need to get out of here, he mumbled to himself as he ran from roof to roof. Since Konoha only had one major hospital, which was situated right in downtown Konoha, he had very few options of where he could go. He thought about going to Makoto in the Uchiha district, but he knew that waking her up along with countless other Uchihas would have been a terrible idea. He then turned towards his second best option, the Hinata. He closed his eyes to try and focus on her general direction, but didn't have much time since he felt something coming toward him. Naruto opened his eyes and saw a wave of water coming towards him and ducked. His eyes narrowed as they tried to track his assailants. Water style. Submersion. A large wall of water was moving full steam towards Naruto, who barely has time to put up a rock wall before it collides with him. Definitely slower than I used to be, he thought bitterly. Let's see. Shushin is out because I don't think my body can take it. I guess I just have to get to her the only fashion way. He groaned and sprinted past the wall towards the clan district. Oh no you don't, the woman shouted while quickly going through hand seals. I won't let you escape. Earth style. Earth bullet. Naruto groaned when he saw the large balls of rock hurtling towards him. He looked down at his body and once again found himself groaning. I feel like I am gonna be doing that a lot more now that I'm awake, he thought while he dodged one of the boulders. Where the hell are the Anbu? He shouted as he continued to run towards Hinata's house. We took care of that little problem already, the large man shouted while chasing the child. Naruto shook his head and continued to hop from rooftop to rooftop as he moved closer and closer towards Hinata and her home. He could feel her chakra signature getting closer and closer. Earth style. Mud river. You know, for Kiri ninjas you sure do use a lot of earth style jutsu, Naruto shouted as he jumped into the air to avoid the mud that was being placed under him. He felt something tugging on his arm and decided to stretch out his arm, allowing for a silver chain to appear and latch onto a nearby building. Well, that's useful, he smirked as he pulled on the chain, propelling him further into the air. Where was this when I was getting back to Konoha? He asked as he flew through the air. It was here he got an idea. He propelled himself into the air, twisted his body so he was facing his assailants and held up a hand seal. Fire style. Fire flame jutsu. While still in the air, Naruto released a large stream of flames towards the ninjas and laughed. He then reached out his arm and shot a chain towards another building and shot back into the direction he wanted to go in. What are those? The woman shouted while dodging the flames. Yeah, that wasn't in the report we got from the boss. The man looked back at the taller mustached ninja who remained quiet. That doesn't matter, Azutaga, the leader said while going through hand seals. I mean, is there a new plan of action? Azutaga asked while he followed his boss. Zanya and I aren't really long-distance fighters. Well then impersonate one, he growled while taking a deep breath. Water style. Violent stream. A highly pressurized stream of water launched out of the man's mouth and flew straight towards Naruto's back. The child looked over his shoulder, saw the attack coming for him, and tried to avoid it. He twisted his body in the air, but was still hit in the shoulder. He tried to launch a chain at a building which was close to him, but all it did was cause his already hurt shoulder to pop out of its socket. Agra. Naruto fell out of the sky and landed badly on the dirt road below him. He groaned as he pulled himself up. He looked down at his light blue hospital robe, which was now covered in dirt. Give up. He looked up and saw all three ninjas forming a semicircle around him with kunais drawn. His eyes narrowed with anger as he tried to get into a position where he could defend himself. I'm sorry, Naruto asked while spitting blood out of his mouth. Did you just tell me to give up? He clenched his fists and turned on his Sharingan. The red eyes glowed in the dark of the alley. Fine then, the leader said while walking towards him. Be that way. The man started walking towards Naruto and was about to stab him before he was interrupted by what looked to be an arrow entering his chest. He staggered back as a second and a third arrow entered his head and his lung. What the hell? The other two ninjas asked as they tried to figure out who shot the arrows. Great timing, Hinata-chan, Naruto smirked as he felt movement form a dark corner of the alley. He looked over and saw a small hooded figure walk out with a metal bow in their hand. They then lowered their hood to reveal the face of one Hinata Hyuga who had a small smile. I'm glad you're awake, Naruto-kun, she said softly as she aimed her bow at the female ninja who was still in shock. We should end this so we can get you back to the hospital. Agreed. He held out his non-injured hand for her to hand him a kunai knife. Once he had the weapon, he launched at the older man who had braced himself for the impact. You're 100 years too early to think you can beat me, kid. He yelled as he slashed at Naruto, who dodged his attack easily. Naruto jumped into the air and sent a flying kick into the man's stomach. So, what's the plan, Hinata? Naruto asked as he slashed at the man's throat. It got blocked by Azutaga who tried to slam his own knife into Naruto's head. Naruto twisted the man's arms and tried to push him away. Why are you asking me, Naruto-kun? Hinata asked as she started going through hand seals. You've always been the one to make the plans on the fly, she said while using her bow as a slashing weapon. You are rescuing me, Nata-chan. He smiled as he dodged a punch to the head. Battle Format 6, she said with a newly found confidence. Naruto nodded his head and performed a backflip over Hinata and started going through one-handed seals. Hey, watch out, they've got some battle strategy thing going on, Azutaga shouted as he formed up with his only living partner. Ready? Naruto asked as he tried to catch his breath. I should be asking you that, Hinata said while going through one-handed seals. It sounds like you're exhausted. Naruto rolled his eyes and smirked. You try fighting immediately after getting out of a coma. He nodded his head signaling for both children to take a deep breath. Hidden Mist Jutsu. Both Kiri ninjas had seen the mist roll enter the alley and laughed. They'll learn to not use our own jutsu against us, Azutage said while starting to go through his own hand seals. Naruto glanced over at Hinata and smirked. The two 5-year-olds were sitting on the roof of a nearby building watching the two ninjas. Ready for the show? He asked while holding up the hand seal for his signature move. She sighed and shook her head, but didn't try to hide the smile on her face. Bring down the thunder. The two ninjas that were in the mist had no clue what was happening when a giant lightning bolt came crashing down. They didn't have any time to react as they were electrocuted and turned to ash. Hinata looked down at the Kiri ninjas and sighed. She knew that they were dead. Oh Kami, Naruto. There were many things that Hitomi Hyuga expected to happen to her. She expected to have her husband's eyes glues on her whenever she walked into a room due to the fact that she had cut him off of any for a period of time. She expected to get glares from the elders of the clan due to being opposed to some of their ideas and ideologies. Something, however, that she didn't think would ever happen to her was her daughter waking her up in the middle of the night screaming. She sat up groggily and looked at her with confusion written all over her face. Hinata, she said while looking at the clock in her room. It's 3 a.m., What could possibly be wrong for it to warrant all this shouting? Naruto-kun is unconscious and injured again. Her daughter shouted while throwing her arms in the air widely. Hinata, Naruto has been in a coma for 2 months. She explained to her daughter. He's still at the hospital. No, he's in my room right now, Ka-chan. Hinata yelled as she grabbed her mom's arm and dragged her out of bed towards the door. That got the gears in Hitomi's head to start turning. Why would Naruto be here? She asked herself while she followed her daughter. Then it hit her. Hinata, she asked her daughter quietly and calmly. Why are you awake right now? Hinata looked at the floor with a blank expression on her face. To be honest with herself, Hinata didn't know why she did what she did. One moment she was asleep, then she felt like something bad was going to happen. She didn't know why, she didn't know how she knew, just that something was going to happen. All she knew was that Naruto was in trouble. And that was enough for her. She picked her head up from the floor and looked at her mother dead in the eyes with the most serious expression that she could muster. Because I knew he was in trouble and had to help. That alone would have been enough of an answer, but for Hitomi the thing that got her was the fire that was burning behind her eyes. The last time she had seen Hinata this determined was the day she was in the hospital talking to Hiruzen. All right, she said while bending to one knee. I believe you. Then let's go. Hinata smiled while walking towards her room. Once she reached it, she slid open the door to reveal a very pale Naruto lying on her bed. Hinata has already reset and healed his dislocated shoulder, and had healed the bruises on his arm and face. He looks to be fine, maybe he was just tired. Hitomi said as she walked over to him and looked at him closer. I'm not totally positive, but I think it's chakra exhaustion, Hinata said quietly while lightly moving her palms over Naruto's chest. She desperately looked at her mother for any kind of help. Ka-chan, I don't know what to do. She looked down at her hands and balled up her fists. Hitomi looked at her daughter and nearly shed a tear at the look of despair on her face. She had watched Hinata sit by his side in the hospital every day for 3 weeks before she was told that it wasn't good for her mental health. Not that throwing herself into intense physical training was any better. Hitomi walked over to Hinata and got down onto her knees so that she could look her in the eyes. She brushed a bit of her indigo hair out of the young girl's eyes and smiled at her sadly. Honey, she said quietly while cupping her cheek. He'll be okay. Hinata looked over at Naruto again and deflated. All the drive and determination gone, only to be replaced by intense sadness. I miss him, she whispered while letting the tears she had been holding back run down her face. I missed him so much. I know, sweetheart. Hinata looked at her best friend and sighed. I can't keep watching him lay in a hospital bed, she sobbed as she tried to keep her tears hidden from her mother. It hurts me so much. Hitomi clutched her chest and let out her own sigh as she saw how distraught her daughter was. She had been in a similar situation with Kushina after she had gotten injured in the war. She gently grabbed her daughter and moved in to give her a hug. Don't worry, darling, she cooed softly as she felt her daughter sob into her. He's going to get better. He's going to get so much stronger that you won't have to worry about him. But if I don't worry, then who will? She asked while looking up at her mother, tears streaming down her face. Makoto-san has her own family to worry about, you have to worry about the clan with 2-san, Kakashi and Yugao have missions to worry about. Who's gonna worry about him if I don't? Hitomi was stunned by what she just heard. She looked at the fire and desperation in her daughter's eyes and truly felt pain. She knew that ever since Hinata found out the lengths that Naruto had gone through to save her, that she was even more determined to be by his side. She had seen it every day as her daughter mad clone after clone to improve. She felt it when she started noticing how hard Hinata's Juken strikes were getting. She knew that Hinata wanted to get stronger, but to see the length that she would go for this boy, it was inspiring. All worry for him. Both girls looked up to see Hiyashi and Hazashi standing in the doorway of Hinata's room. Both men were wearing their battle attire as if they had been preparing for a fight. Hitomi looked at her husband with a confused look on her face as though asking for an explanation. As you said all those months ago, Hiyashi walked further into the room and laid his hand on Hinata's shoulder. Naruto is one of your babies. We both have seen that boy grow so much over the time he's been with us that I've grown to see him as my own son. Hiyashi, Hitomi whispered as she looked at her husband, tears threatening to fall from her own eyes. You don't mean that, do you? She asked, her voice trembling. I do. He walked over to the boy's bed and placed his hand on his shoulder. He's the son of my best friend, and damn it if I'm not going to help him when shit inevitably hits the fan. I agree with you, brother, Hazashi said from the doorway. And the Branch family feels the same. Hinata moved her mother so that she could get a better look at her father. Do you truly mean that? She asked quietly. Yes. Hiyashi leaned down and looked his daughter squarely in the eyes. He then nodded his head. Every word. Naruto's immediate response to waking up in a different room was to jump out the window and run away. However, as soon as he realized whose room it was, he relaxed. He sensed someone approach the door and immediately smiled when he figured out who it was. It's good to see you awake, Naruto-kun. Makoto Ka-chan. He squealed as he tried to get out of bed but couldn't due to how sore he was. Makoto smiled at the child that was hers in all but name. She had heard from Hitomi that he was caught up in some shenanigans and rushed over to see how he was doing. She walked further into the room, her red and white sundress moving with her as she crossed the distance. She finally knelt down and gently took Naruto's hand in hers and cried. How are you feeling? She asked as she gently rubbed circles into the back of the boy's hand. Sore? He asked as he scooted over so that he could be closer to her. She laughed quietly while looking at the child's body. Hinata had done a good job getting rid of most of the bruises and scars with healing salves and medical chakra, though there was a bandage around the boy's left shoulder where he dislocated it. I bet you're feeling sore, she said while still holding his hand. You were sprinting through the roofs of Konoha being chased by ninjas after being in a coma. She chided while still rubbing his hand. Naruto at least had the decency to blush at how crazy the situation sounded. He didn't even know if he was allowed to be doing half the stuff he did last night. He could definitely feel that his jutsu were taking more chakra than they used to. Now that he thought about it, he definitely didn't feel the aching pain in his joints and leg muscles when he was running yesterday. Yeah, he smiled slightly while rubbing his head with his right hand. It was a crazy night last night. Makoto agreed while letting go of his hand and walking over to him. We need to get you back to the hospital so that they can check you over now that you're awake. Why would I do that? Naruto asked as he swung his legs over the bed. He could feel his body protest as he stood up and walked to the door. Why would I do that when I can train? Naruto walked down the stairs and into the kitchen where he saw Hinata eating while reading what looked to be a medical textbook. He saw her look up and her eyes widen when she saw him. Naruto! She shouted as she jumped from her chain and ran to give him a tight hug. You're awake, she said into his chest as she cried softly. Naruto grunted when he felt the weight of his friend come crashing into him. He had to take a step back in order to avoid falling. He wrapped his arms around her and hugged her tightly. The last time had seen her before last night was in his arms as he crossed into the village. Now, she was okay. She had made it. It's good to see you, Hinata-chan, he whispered as he breathed in the scent of her shampoo. He buried his head into her long magenta hair and let a few tears fall. It's good to see you too, Naruto-kun, she replied while burying her face deeper into his chest. The duo stood there in the middle of the kitchen for what felt like hours. Neither wanted to move lest the other suddenly disappear. They both had longed for this moment for so long, that it felt surreal that it was finally happening. However, the moment couldn't last, and both children were brought out of their hug by their respective parental figures. It's good to see that both of you have finally reunited, Hitomi said while holding a mug of coffee in her hands. However, I think Naruto would benefit from a good meal and a trip to the hospital to make sure that he is 100% okay. Both children nodded their heads and let go of the other. Hinata moved back to her seat at the table and sighed. Now that you're awake, you're going to have to see the Hokage, she said while taking a bite of her toast. I figured he would want to know what happened while we were out there, Naruto replied while making his way to sit next to his best friend. Actually, he paused as he looked out the window. What day is it? It's December 25th, sweetheart, Makoto answered while handing Naruto a plate of breakfast. You were out for exactly 2 months. 2 months? Naruto shouted while flinging his arms into the air. Yes, Naruto-kun, Hinata said quietly while trying not to let her anxiety show. You were unconscious for 2 months. Geez, did we even pass the exams? He asked while taking a bite of his eggs. Funny you should ask. Makoto walked over to her purse and pulled out the same 2 scrolls that had been given to Hinata. These are for you. I'm sure Hiruzen would have wanted to talk to you about it, but he's not here right now. What are they? He asked while Makoto handed him the scrolls. Once he had them in his hands, he tossed them up and down and examined them extremely closely. Just open them, silly, Hitomi giggled while sitting down in front of Hinata. Naruto shrugged his shoulders and channeled a bit of chakra through the scrolls and caused it to explode in a small cloud of smoke. He waved his hand in the air to clear the smoke from his face and immediately stopped moving when he saw the green jacket and a piece of paper. I passed, he shouted as he looked at the Chunin jacket that was now in his possession. How the did I pass? He then looked at Hinata, who was smirking at him. Did you pass too? Oh, just wait till you see the second scroll, she said while turning her full attention to Naruto. He raised his eyebrows and opened the second scroll. He mumbled quietly as he read the piece of paper, his eyes growing wider and wider as he continued reading. I knew it, he shouted while fist bumping the air. I knew he was going to put us into the Anbu. He turned to face his friend who was smiling at him. I'm guessing you're accepting. Of course I am, she answered while sliding over her application. The paperwork is due January 4th, so you need to get it signed. Oh, he won't need to worry about that. Makoto reached into her bag and pulled out a scroll with the Hokage's seal on it. Kakashi and Yugao already took care of it. She tossed the scroll to Naruto, who caught it. All it needs is your signature and then you can take it to the Hokage. Naruto nodded his head and grabbed a pen from one of the many that Hinata had when she was studying and signed the document with his name. He showed it to Makoto, who nodded her head and smiled. When will we officially get promoted? Hinata asked while Naruto tried to put on the jacket. When I talked to Hiruzen, he said we could have a small ceremony with a few of the other clans that knew that you both were in the exams. Hitomi explained while she collected the clean dishes. So who all knew we were going to Kiri? Naruto asked while drinking a glass of milk. The Yamanaka, Nara, and Abiram, Makoto answered. Don't forget Danzo, Naruto added while clenching his fist. The little shit tried to kill us before we even left the village. Makoto and Hitomi looked at each other and sighed. They both knew that they would have to know the full story of what happened to Naruto and Hinata when they left. However, they also knew that it could wait. They had seen how happy the 2 children were to see each other. Should we push for details? Hitomi mumbled to her friend as they watched the children talk about the training they were going to do to prepare for the Anbu. Makoto shook her head and smiled gently. When she looked at Naruto and Hinata, she could only see herself and Minato. 2 lifelong friends whose lives were thrown into chaos because of the actions and decisions of others. She looked at the children and softly smiled. No, she said while wiping a tear that was starting to fall down her face. He's only just gotten back. Let's let them enjoy this little bit of peace they get before they start training for the next life-altering disaster Sarutobi is going to throw them into next. Hitomi nodded her head and continued to sip her cup of coffee as she watched the children talk. Yeah, she said quietly. You're right.